Most people ignored the quiet woman in the weapons bay, just a janitor with grease on her hands and a rifle older than the recruits she served. But when a split-second mistake nearly cost a man his life, the shot that saved him didn't come from the Golden Boy sniper. It came from her. This is the untold story of Nora Ellison, the woman they called a failure, until she rewrote the rules of war. Welcome to my channel. Most people walk past the janitor's closet in a place like Fort Carson without ever thinking twice. Smells like oil and bleach, sounds like clinking tools and quiet solitude. That's where I ended up, weapon maintenance, tucked between the firing range and the forgotten side of the armory, after I failed out of sniper school. My name's Nora Ellison. I was 35 when I reported for training. Most of the recruits called me Auntie behind my back, though I heard it loud and clear. They weren't wrong. My hands were rougher than theirs, my knees louder when I crouched, and my patience ran longer than a winter in Cheyenne. But what they didn't know was that every scar on my knuckles had a story. And the rifle I carried? It was older than most of them, and 10 times more reliable. It was my father's Remington 700, bolt-action, walnut stock rubbed smooth from decades of use. He hunted with it every fall up in northern Idaho, and when he passed, it became mine. That rifle had taken elk from 600 yards in thin mountain air, and it had taught me the meaning of stillness. I brought it to sniper school like it was family, because it was. They didn't care. The instructors wanted speed, aggression, split-second reaction time. They wanted digital scopes and composite stocks. They wanted muscle memory shaped by video games and CrossFit. What I gave them was precision. Deliberate. Slow. Unshakable. They didn't want that. 3 weeks in, I missed the final mark by 21 seconds. Not a missed shot. Hell no. It was a perfect shot, center mass at 800 yards. But they rang the buzzer before I fired. Too slow for combat conditions, the range officer said, like that was the end of it. And maybe it was. I didn't argue. Just packed my gear in silence and walked off the range. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. But when I closed the case around that rifle, my father's rifle, I felt something settle heavy in my chest. Not grief. Not shame. Purpose, maybe. Or the quiet realization that the story wasn't over. Just rerouted. They reassigned me to weapons maintenance. That's usually the last stop before someone quits. But I didn't quit. Not because of pride or stubbornness or some hallmark sense of grit. I stayed because that rifle deserved better than defeat. Because my father had whispered stories through that walnut stock, and I wasn't done listening. The depot was quiet most days. Cleaning benches, torque wrenches, headspace gauges. I became the invisible one, the woman who tuned the tools but never touched the targets. Recruits would drop their rifles off with barely a grunt. Some of them didn't even remember my name. That was fine. I wasn't there to impress anyone. But I saw everything. Each rifle told its story. Every scratch, every fouling pattern in the barrel, every stiff trigger reset. It was like reading someone's diary. Some kids cleaned obsessively but missed the gas ring wear. Others bragged about tight groupings but didn't realize their scope rail was a degree off center. I kept notes. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I couldn't not. It's just how I'm wired. I tracked bolt lift resistance, scope drift, trigger creep, firing pinstrikes. I recorded humidity readings, oil viscosity after cold storage, barrel harmonics under different loads. It wasn't a job. It was a study. One name came up again and again, Jeremy Cross. He was 23, tall, tanned, and cocky in that way only someone still bulletproof could be. Fast on the trigger, clean under pressure, and beloved by every instructor. He was the face on the recruiting posters. They called him Alpha Zero. But his rifle told a different story. Under stress, when his heart rate spiked, his shots drifted a hair to the right. A quarter inch at 300 yards. Nothing major. Nothing you'd see on paper. But I saw it. Every Friday and Tuesday, he dropped that rifle off without a word. And every time, I made a tiny correction. A half click on the windage. A tension adjustment to the mounting ring. He never noticed. But his scores got better. After a month, instructors said he was a natural evolution of modern sniper theory. They had no idea his success came from a woman they discarded and a rifle they didn't understand. I smiled quietly and kept cleaning. By the second month, my observations turned into patterns. Not just Cross, others too. Brielle Sorensen had a trigger that stuck under cold weather. I fixed it. Tomas Delgado's cheek weld wore uneven on the stock, messing with his zero. I reshaped the comb padding. Nobody asked. Nobody knew. But they all shot better. And me? I kept waiting. Not for recognition. Not even for redemption. I was waiting for the right shot. Most folks think of rifles as cold machines. Metal, wood, glass. Tools. But to me, every rifle was a creature. It had habits, moods, even a voice. You just had to learn how to listen. And I listened. Day after day in that drafty maintenance bay, I built a world of whispers. Trigger resets that clinked a little too soon. Barrels that warmed up too fast under repeat fire. I logged it all. Not in a spreadsheet or some base-issued software, but in a battered green notebook wrapped in canvas and streaked with carbon dust. Nobody asked me for that data. Certainly not the program leaders. I'd been labeled a failure, after all, reassigned for inefficiency. But that notebook was starting to say something different. Something the instructors didn't want to hear. That their fastest shooters cracked under pressure. That their top candidates were coasting on speed instead of learning how to adapt. I started compiling. It began small. An entry here, a note there. But by the end of the third month, I had enough to write a thesis, if anyone cared to read it. Charts of shooter performance under simulated stress. Comparative analyses between speed-based drills and variable condition response. Case studies, rifle profiles, recommendations. 47 pages. I titled it, Precision Drift in High-Stress Environments, an operational review of performance loss and corrective maintenance. It was the most thorough thing I'd ever written, and I'd once drafted a supply logistics white paper that got published in an Army quarterly. I left a copy in the inbox of Major Dorsey, the training program lead. No one mentioned it. But 2 weeks later, we started getting new torque tools, better cleaning solvents, bench scopes that could measure micro-deviation across windage mounts. The official inspection checklist doubled in length. And I knew. Somebody had read it. They just weren't about to admit that the woman they booted from their elite sniper pipeline had quietly improved the accuracy of their entire program. I didn't need credit. I had my routine. Every night after lights out, I would unlock the back door to the decommissioned 600-yard range. Nobody used it anymore. The younger crowd liked their virtual ranges and reactive steel. But this strip of wind-scoured dirt had character. And ghosts. My kind of place. I'd haul out my dad's Remington, line up 3 paper targets, and sit with the silence. There was no timer. No instructor. Just me, the cold wind curling down from the Rockies, and the hum of the earth reminding me to breathe slow and steady. Those shots weren't for anyone else. They were for memory, for rhythm, for a lifetime of believing that some things, like silence, patience, and a clean break on the trigger, still mattered. The older techs at the depot started taking notice. Men who'd spent 30 years rotating through bases, armorers who could recite every spec on the M110 like a bedtime story. They started bringing me problem rifles. Barrel walking on this one. One said, handing me an M2010. Can't figure the why. I fixed it before lunch. You see this bolt timing? Said another, tapping the receiver of a 308 marksman. Something's off in the lugs. I diagnosed it in 10 minutes. Cleaned it in 15. Word spread. Not loud, not official, but in the quiet way real respect always does. My workbench became the last stop before inspection and the first stop when a rifle acted up. And still, I remained invisible to the program. Just the quiet woman in the workshop who made their weapons work. Until the day Jeremy Cross showed up, not with a rifle, but with a question. It was February. Cold enough to turn your breath into chalk and make oil sluggish in the Bolt Raceway. He walked in with a different energy that day, less swagger, more hesitation. I think you've been tweaking my rifle, he said, voice low, eyes scanning the shop like we might be recorded. I didn't stop wiping the bolt carrier I was working on. Routine maintenance, I said. No, he replied, firmer now. This is more than routine. My shot consistency changed under pressure. Stabilized. I'm pulling better scores during simulations I used to drop. I haven't changed anything. So, what's going on? I set the bolt down gently, turned, and met his gaze. Equipment performs better with proper maintenance. He narrowed his eyes. I think you're fixing me. That got a small chuckle out of me. First laugh in weeks. No, I said. You're fixing yourself. I'm just making sure the rifle stays honest. He nodded, slowly. Why'd you do it? Help me, I mean. After you got dropped. I hesitated, then said, Because the mission matters, not the pride. And the mission needs you to shoot straight when it counts. He didn't reply, just stood there, quiet, the way someone does when their understanding of the world starts to shift. That's when I heard the footsteps, heels, deliberate, too sharp for anyone assigned to the range. A woman in a navy coat stepped into my workshop, flanked by a pair of civilian contractors with briefcases and quiet eyes. She wore insignia I hadn't seen up close in years. Colonel Noel Franklin, Logistics Command. The kind of officer who didn't show up at dusty armories without a reason. You Nora Ellison? She asked. I nodded. We need to talk. Jeremy looked between us, then backed away like a man who'd just realized he wasn't the center of gravity anymore. And just like that, the story began to change. The door closed behind Colonel Franklin with the kind of finality that only comes with stars on your shoulder and clearance that makes grown men whisper. She didn't offer her hand, just looked around the shop like she was measuring it against some mental checklist. You don't look like much, she said after a beat, eyeing my flannel shirt, my worn jeans, the smudge of bore cleaner on my forearm. Ma'am, I said, neutral as I could manage. Sit, she said, motioning to the metal stool at the side of my bench. I sat. She didn't. Where's the notebook? I didn't ask how she knew about it. I just reached under the bench, pulled it from behind the rag bin, and laid it gently on the surface between us. She opened it with the kind of care most people reserve for antique books or loaded weapons. She flipped through the pages without comment. Graphs, handwritten charts, windage notes, humidity corrections, variable accuracy curves. Everything I'd logged in silence while the program marched forward without me. When she reached the page marked Cross, J, her expression shifted. You predicted his drift. I observed it, I replied. Didn't need a prediction. She paused, tapping a finger against the margin where I'd drawn a curve mapping his deviation under high-stress live fire. A quarter-inch left at elevated heart rates. Consistent. Documented. Your data is more thorough than what I get from half my analyst teams, she muttered. I don't have teams, I said. I have ears. And patience. That earned me the faintest grin. Barely there. Gone in a blink. Do you know what today is? She asked suddenly. I shook my head. She turned toward the window, where the wind had started to dust the tarmac with a dry snow flurry. It's press day? Congressional observers, Pentagon suits, defense media. All here for the final showcase of our sniper program. Oh, that explained the contractors in mirrored sunglasses. They're running a full-spectrum demonstration, she said. Simulated combat. Urban live fire. Moving targets, smoke. It's the kind of thing that makes senators open checkbooks. And you need it to go perfect. I need it to go honest, she replied. Then turned to face me fully. And I don't trust that it will. I raised an eyebrow. She motioned to the notebook. Your data says our top shooter, Cross, falls apart under pressure he doesn't recognize. It's not lack of talent. It's blindness. He's never been taught to see the variables until they're already affecting him. I stayed quiet. But you, she said, stepping closer. You saw it all from a workbench. I didn't know where this was going, but I didn't look away. The demonstration is live-fed, she said. But tomorrow's final simulation? No cameras, no press, just soldiers, rifles, and unpredictable environments. Real conditions. That's where the truth lives, I said. She nodded. Exactly. Colonel Franklin moved around the bench and looked at the Remington on the wall above my tools. Is that the rifle? I stood, took it down with slow, practiced care. It still smelled faintly of pine oil and brass polish. Yep, I said. My dad's. She studied it. No nod of approval. No all. Just a quiet respect. Like she was looking at a veteran. Then she said something I didn't expect. Tomorrow's evaluation might go sideways. I want you watching. Quietly. From wherever you need to be. I blinked. You want me? Overseeing a classified exercise? Not officially, she said. Think of it as observation. From someone who knows what to watch for. I didn't respond right away. What happens if I see something? I asked finally. You do what you've always done, she said. Act when others hesitate. Then she left. Just like that. I sat there in the workshop long after the door clicked shut. The notebook still open. The rifle still warm from my hands. And outside, a storm was beginning to build. They started before dawn. I was at my workbench by 0430, pretending to calibrate a firing pin gauge while quietly watching the east-facing window. The snow had stopped overnight, but the wind hadn't. It swept across the range in low, bone-humming gusts that would knock a bullet half an inch off course at 600 yards if you weren't paying attention. But nobody was paying attention to the weather. They were too busy setting up the show. The final evaluation exercise was always framed as a combat simulation, real stress, real noise, and real consequences. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't about graduating another batch of shooters. It was about proving the whole training program worked. And that meant no room for error. They filled the range with variables. Smoke generators set at intervals. Giant fans pushing unpredictable crosswinds. A soundscape of distant gunfire, screaming, radio static, designed to mimic battlefield chaos. The target system was a mixed array. Hostiles, civilians, no-shoots. All programmed to pop at irregular intervals and varying distances. It wasn't a shooting drill. It was judgment under fire. And I wasn't supposed to be there. But I was. Up on the catwalk of the adjacent maintenance tower, lying prone beside a rusted spotting scope mounted on a sandbag. I had my dad's Remington across my chest and a thermos of black coffee sitting in the snow. No cameras, no observers up there, just wind, frost, and a wide-angle view of every lane. Through the glass, I watched Jeremy cross-step into position. His breath was visible, short puffs like a steam engine. Gloves off. Bare fingers curled around the grip of his custom-issue SR-X1 rifle, the one I'd tuned half a dozen times without him knowing. He looked calm, focused, but I saw the same signs I'd written in my notebook. Tension in his cheek weld. Slight hitch in his support elbow. Breathing just a tick too fast. He wasn't breaking down, but he was compensating, already. And he hadn't even fired yet. Over the course of 20 minutes, I watched him work through the scenario. His shots were sharp, decisive. The instructors watching from the control tower looked pleased. From the outside, it was a clean run. But I knew what they didn't. He wasn't reacting to the targets. He was reacting to the noise. His grouping on moving targets drifted right. Just like my data had predicted. It was minor, barely an inch at 400 yards. But at this level, that inch could mean life or death. I took notes in silence. Nothing judgmental. Just the truth. Then I heard the shot. Not from Cross. Not from anyone assigned to the range. It was a different caliber. Slower. A distinct crack that came from farther downrange, behind the left barrier wall. That was wrong. I lifted my scope and swept left, adjusting focus. And that's when I saw the malfunction. One of the targets, a pop-up hostile silhouette, had activated early. Way early. And behind it, partially obscured by smoke and fog, was a human figure. Range safety officer. Doing a visual inspection during a lull, probably assuming the system was still offline in that lane. My heart stuttered. From Jeremy's position, the target looked legit. Clean line of sight. Proper distance. No shadows or flags to signal a problem. He was already shifting his rifle toward it. I checked my radio. Dead. Battery had been low and I'd forgotten to swap it out after inventory checks. No way to reach the tower. No way to warn anyone. And the safety officer, whoever he was, had just stepped directly into the line of fire. I had seconds. I didn't think. I just moved. The Remington came up in one fluid motion. Safety off. Round chambered. My fingers were cold, but my breath was calm. The scope was already zeroed. I'd fired 1,000 times on that same range. I knew the wind. I knew the drop. But this wasn't about hitting a target. This was about missing everything but the thing I had to hit. I took aim, not at Jeremy, not at the safety officer. At the exact junction between the barrel and the upper receiver of Jeremy's rifle. A spot the size of a postage stamp. At 400 yards. One shot. No second chances. I slowed my breathing. Felt the trigger wall. And fired. The sound echoed sharp against the steel beams above me, like a thunderclap in a quiet church. Through the scope, I saw Jeremy's rifle jerk violently as the bolt locked up and the receiver sparked. It didn't explode, thank God, but it jammed hard, neutralizing the weapon in an instant. He flinched, looked down, confused, alive. The safety officer blinked, startled by the noise, then slowly backed behind the barrier, still unaware how close he'd come to becoming a headline and a folded flag. The whole range froze. And then I heard boots. Someone was coming up the tower stairs. I didn't lower the rifle. Not yet. My eye was still in the scope, watching Jeremy cross-step back from his weapon. His head was on a swivel now, scanning for the source of the shot that had just knocked his rifle offline with surgical precision. His gloves were shaking. His instructors were shouting through the comms. And then I heard the boots again, heavier now, closer. The clank of a sidearm holster brushing steel. A voice followed. Ellison, step away from the rifle. Hands where I can see them. I turned my head slowly. Colonel Franklin stood at the top of the tower. No helmet, no gloves. Just a wind-burned face under a sharp officer's cap and eyes that didn't miss a thing. Her right hand was resting near her holster, but she hadn't drawn. I kept my hands on the rifle, but lifted them away from the trigger. It was a clean disable, I said calmly. Receivers jammed, barrels fine. Shooters intact. Her jaw was tight. What the hell just happened? I turned the scope toward her. Your golden boy was about to shoot a range officer. Target malfunction. No visual indicators. Smoke and wind obscured the background. Her mouth twitched, just a little. And you made that shot. From here. Had to. Silence for a moment. Then, quietly, she asked, how sure were you? Absolutely. She studied me the way a sniper studies a range. Carefully, precisely, no wasted movement. Then she stepped forward, crouched next to the Remington, and looked through the scope herself. After a few seconds, she stood. Range safety just confirmed, she said. Sergeant Nielsen. Doing a system check after a pop-up reset error. You stopped Cross from taking the shot. I nodded once. You just saved a man's life, she added, then softened her voice. And probably his career. Down on the range, Cross was still standing with his weapon cradled in his arms, a small wisp of smoke curling from the jammed receiver. He wasn't panicking, but he wasn't moving either. He looked stunned, humbled, and alive. What happens now? I asked. Colonel Franklin didn't answer right away. Instead, she keyed her shoulder mic. Bring the instructors to the tower. And Cross. I want them to see something. She turned back to me, the wind tugging at her coat. You weren't even supposed to be here, she said. Neither was the safety officer. That got a smile. A small one. Earned. Within 5 minutes, the catwalk was crowded. 3 instructors, 1 clipboard-wielding staff sergeant, and a very quiet Jeremy Cross. He was holding the disabled rifle like a broken promise. One of the instructors glanced at the Remington next to me and frowned. This weapon isn't regulation, he muttered. Colonel Franklin rounded on him. Neither was the malfunction that nearly cost you a man's life. That shut him up. She looked at Cross. You saw a hostile. You followed procedure. But you didn't see the background through the smoke. Cross nodded slowly. I didn't check twice. I was already lined up. She did. The colonel said, jerking a thumb at me. From 400 yards. With a rifle you all told her wasn't fast enough. The silence was heavier than the snow on the roof. I made the shot, I said quietly, addressing Cross now. Not to stop you. To save him. You didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't know what you didn't know. He looked at me. Really looked at me. You fixed my rifle, he said. I thought it was just a hunch. But now I think you saw everything. All along. I nodded once. He offered his hand. I took it. Then Colonel Franklin spoke again, this time to everyone. I'm making this official, she said. Effective immediately, Nora Ellison is to be added to the training advisory staff, with authority to audit our precision curriculum. The instructors shifted. One of them opened his mouth, then shut it again. Any objections? The colonel asked, with all the charm of a coiled rattlesnake. Nobody objected. Cross just smiled. Wry, a little embarrassed. I've got a lot to learn, he said to me. Then you're already ahead of where you were yesterday, I replied. As the others filed out, Franklin lingered. You understand what you did here? She asked. What you proved. That slow doesn't mean soft, I said. And seeing the shot matters more than speed in taking it. She nodded, satisfied, then handed me a small envelope. Tomorrow morning. Briefing room C at 0800. You're going to help us rewrite the book on this program. I took it. Down below, the range was quiet again. The smoke had cleared. The wind had calmed. And my dad's rifle? Still warm. Briefing room C wasn't much to look at. Beige walls, buzzing lights, a projector older than I was, and a whiteboard that still had ghost marks from some forgotten logistics meeting. But when I walked in at 0758, 5 people were already seated, 3 in uniform, 2 in civilian suits. Colonel Franklin stood at the head of the table. She gestured toward a seat next to her. This is Nora Ellison, she said. She's going to help fix what's broken. There wasn't a single handshake. Just nods. Skeptical, but not dismissive. We've spent years building a sniper program based on speed and precision, she began. But it's been out of balance. And Nora's data, her results, prove it. I set my green notebook on the table and opened to a page labeled Stress Deviation Patterns. Nothing fancy, just data points, honest and unvarnished. I spoke plainly. Under ideal conditions, our top candidates shoot 95% accurate. Add real pressure, crosswind, confusion, non-standard noise, and that number drops by 40%. You're not training shooters. You're training gamblers. One of the suits raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we slow them down? I'm suggesting you teach them how to see, I said. Situational awareness. Environmental reading. Patience. Colonel Franklin backed me up. We're not eliminating combat efficiency. We're enhancing survivability. Accuracy that holds under pressure is the difference between a successful op and a body bag. I laid out a 5-point revision. Prioritize wind reading and environmental variability. Introduce variable target behavior, not predictable sequences. Institute live-fire judgment drills under stress, not just speed tests. Require personal rifle maintenance, hands-on. Mandate observation periods. Silent watching. No weapons. Just eyes. That last one, Franklin said, comes straight from Nora's failure. She failed your time test. But in the field, she's the only one who saw the danger before it happened. One of the senior instructors leaned forward. If this works, it'll change the entire curriculum. It has to, I said, because real combat isn't tidy, and real shooters don't always get a second shot. Silence fell. Then the suit nodded. You've got approval to pilot the changes. Fort Carson will be the testing ground. Franklin looked at me and smiled, barely. Congratulations. You just passed the most important exam of your life. I didn't smile back, not because I wasn't proud, but because I knew this was just the beginning. There's a difference between fixing a shot and fixing a system, and I was here to do both. Fort Carson's training grounds were a mess of mud and pine needles when we rolled out the first pilot course. 10 recruits, all sharp, all fast. None of them knew what was coming. That was the point. The new course scrapped half the old playbook. Gone were the clock-driven qualifiers and predictable target lanes. Instead, I gave them silence. Observation drills. Hours watching without shooting. Tracking wind flags, sunlight shifts, shadows. Most of them twitched with impatience. You expect us to just sit here? One asked. Yes, I said. Until you can tell me what the world is doing, without firing around. By week 2, things got interesting. A young recruit named Santos missed 2 simulated hostiles because he couldn't see past the smoke. I showed him how wind patterns behave differently across uneven ground. The next day, he nailed every shot. Another, Juno, flinched at every explosion in the stress drills. I handed her my notebook and had her map her breathing alongside each sound cue. By the 3rd session, she was calm as still water. Meanwhile, Cross came back. He requested re-entry, this time under my guidance. I don't want to shoot faster, he said. I want to see like you. He trained beside the rookies. No rank. No special treatment. He even started a journal, copying diagrams from my notebook. His grouping shrank. His confidence grew. But more than that, he started noticing the unnoticed, shadow movement, wind breaks, false positives. That's when I knew it was working. Mid-course, Colonel Franklin visited. Watched the drills in silence. Afterward, she pulled me aside. You're creating something they don't even have language for yet, she said. It's not new, I told her. It's just been forgotten. She nodded and remembered just in time. We had 2 weeks left. 2 weeks before D.C. would ask for results. Before someone in a clean office decided whether all this was a fluke or the future. I wasn't worried about their numbers. I was watching their eyes. And I could see it. They were finally starting to see. The final drill came with no warning. Overcast sky. Fresh snow. No prep. No briefings. Just a stack of ammo, a map, and a single instruction. 1 shot. 1 chance. Target will appear sometime in the next 2 hours. You won't know when. You won't know where. Wait. Watch. Act only when certain. We called it the still test. Most failed. Not because they missed. Because they couldn't wait. The target, a pop-up steel plate painted like a civilian, appeared for 7 seconds. Some fired in 3. 1 shot too soon. Another too late. But 4 didn't flinch. Santos. Juno. A quiet kid named Park. And Cross. They didn't just wait. They read everything. Saw the wind kick dust 20 yards left. Noted the bird activity stopping 5 seconds before. Felt the temperature dip a hair as the pressure shifted. And when the target popped, they didn't hesitate. For clean hits. 0 false fires. I watched from behind a scope 2 ridgelines away. Didn't move. Just breathed. Slow and even. Franklin stood beside me, hands in her coat. That's the program, she said. Right there. Later that night, I found a note on my bench. Scrawled in Cross's handwriting. You taught me to wait. You saved a life. You changed mine. It wasn't pride I felt. It was peace. A week after the still test, I stood in the Pentagon. It felt surreal. Steel elevators, fluorescent lights, name tags with too many bars. I wasn't wearing a uniform. Just a plain jacket and my dad's old watch. They brought me into a quiet room with a long table and 7 people who hadn't touched a rifle in decades. Colonel Franklin stood beside me, a thick binder in her arms. Our full curriculum revision. My notebook was inside, scanned and copied, pages of handwritten wind charts and scope corrections, now formal doctrine. One of the officials leaned back. We've seen the performance data. It's impressive. But why should we change an entire training philosophy based on one anomaly? I didn't flinch. Because the old system failed me. And I'm the reason one of your shooters didn't take the wrong life. Silence. I kept going. You've built a program around hitting fast. I'm showing you how to hit right. There's a difference. One saves reputations. The other saves lives. Another official flipped through the data. Cross's improvements are undeniable. This Juno, her precision under pressure was near perfect. What changed? Vision, I said. Not eyesight. Understanding. Awareness. The ability to wait for the right moment. It's a muscle you've never trained. Franklin nodded. We're not asking to throw out combat readiness. We're asking to create shooters who can adapt when readiness fails. There was a pause. Then someone at the far end said, approve it. Just like that. I left the building the same way I entered, quietly, without fanfare. But this time, the weight I carried wasn't doubt. It was purpose. Back at Fort Carson, I hung the Remington on its hook above my bench. I cleaned it one last time, oiled the bolt, smoothed the stock, ran my thumb over the worn notch near the trigger guard, where my father's hand once rested, where mine had learned to follow. It wasn't retired out of sentiment. It had earned its place. That rifle had spoken once when it mattered most, and that was enough. Across the workshop, recruits filtered in and out, not just to drop off rifles anymore, but to ask questions. Can I show you my shot log? Do you think I'm overcompensating on wind calls? Would you teach me how to see like that? And always I did. Cross came by weekly now, not as a student, though he never stopped learning, but as a quiet equal. We ran drills together, compared notes, even disagreed sometimes. But he never forgot who taught him patience. Colonel Franklin stopped in less often. When she did, she never stayed long. She'd just nod at the rifle, at the charts on the walls, at the young soldiers sharpening skills they didn't even have a name for before. The program changed. Not overnight, but steadily. Word spread to other bases. New instructors came to observe. Field units started reporting better performance in real ops. Cooler heads, smarter shots, fewer regrets. And my notebook? It wasn't mine anymore. Not really. It lived in a laminated binder now. Shared, copied, cited. Still, I kept the original. Canvas-wrapped and weathered. It stayed under my bench. Quiet. Ready. Just in case. Sometimes I'd come in early, before the snow melted off the roof. I'd sit at the workbench with a cup of coffee, staring at that old rifle on the wall, remembering what my dad once told me, standing on a hillside in Wyoming. The best shot, he said, is the one you never had to take. But when you do, make damn sure it counts. I didn't build my name by being fast. I built it by waiting, by seeing, by taking one shot when it mattered most. And that was enough.